Alright, so over a month after I talked about the two premiere episodes of this Twilight Zone reboot by Jordan Peele, the comedian, and Nightmare at 30,000 Feet, I kind of got off track a little bit. I did watch these as they were released, but the trouble with me doing this over a month later now is the fact that I just really didn't have a whole lot to put into this conversation, because the trouble is that I'm just really not finding a passion for what they're doing here for the most part. And there's just sort of, I don't know how I feel about this, this whole series, because the thing about it mainly is, well, the first thing I was a little worried about after I watched Replay was, okay, how do I go about talking about this without there being like a whole sort of political debate? And the thing is that this, I mean, we talked about before the fact that this is not new to the Twilight Zone whatsoever. It was always about, you know, the social commentary and all that, regardless of how bizarre the story. There was almost always sort of something, you know, some sort of social commentary lurking underneath it. But that's the thing, is that it's the lurking underneath it thing. Now, obviously, oftentimes it was also incredibly blatant. Probably also in a sense that there's some episodes that I haven't seen them in so long, if I go back and watch them now, they might be a totally different thing than I remember them as now, and it was much more blatant than I even realized back then. But I mean, this series is really, really going for that. In a way that it sort of feels like they don't have a whole lot of other intentions with it, apart from sending some kind of blatant message that we get the first 5 minutes into the episode, and then just dragging it out, oftentimes for almost an hour, when the original show pulled off some masterful stuff with, 25 minutes each, without breaking that. And here, there's just a lot of, I don't know. I think Replay is significantly more cut down lengthwise than the others. But, and also, on top, it's not just the political thing either. There's also the whole thing of it sort of catering to this whole thing that's gotten into discussion now, and that is, a term you probably keep hearing a lot is Easter eggs. Like the little shit that they throw in there that, like, people that really know, like, you know, the inside references and, you know, previous shows and all that, we'll be able to spot and feel like they're in some sort of special club or something. Like, apparently some people consider the plush gremlin at the end of Nightmare at 30,000 Feet laying on the beach an Easter egg, when it's the entire fucking shot is the thing laying there, as if we won't get it. And people have become obsessed with this whole Easter egg thing, especially when you look at stuff like, you know, the Marvel movies and pretty much anything that comes out that has an established fan base. And so it's like, when they're not really trying to throw those political points in, which are totally necessary, they're doing the whole, hey, let's see how many inside references we can make. And they're kind of forgetting to tell a really intriguing story here, I think. So as I go into these, keep in mind I did say that I watched them as they aired, so when I talk about Replay right now, it's been 4 weeks since I saw Replay. So if, you know, if there's something that maybe I've forgotten about or something that, you know, sounds off, that's probably the reason. I know a lot of people that watch YouTube are very hard of hearing, so I will say that one more time. I did watch one of these episodes 4 weeks ago and one 3 weeks ago, and so on. And I ran into a bit of trouble, because sometimes I take down little notes if there's something that I wanted to remember to mention. And so I opened my window the other day, and a bug came in that scared the shit out of me. So, in my defense, the nearest weapon I grabbed to crush it with was my notes for A Traveler, Episode 4. So I'm gonna have to wing that. So, but as far as Replay goes, and here's the thing about the political stuff, is it's a really powerful story that they have here, especially with the current context that it has. There's nothing wrong with putting that stuff in these stories, especially stuff that you can make really riveting stories out of. And the concept for Replay and the context from real life it's using to tell this story is really great stuff and really sort of ingenious. But it's the blatantness of it all that's just really off-putting to me. So we've got Sana Lathan and her son, who are driving to take him to college, I believe it is. Only they go to this diner, and there's a cop there, a racist cop, that basically torments them, and this will ultimately end with her son being shot. So then she realizes that the ancient video camera that she has, if she hits rewind on it, it takes her back in time and she can try over and over again, but somehow it's inevitable that this cop traps them and finds them in some way. And you take the you set the angle they're going for aside. Also, in regards to just being like, you know, a freaky little tale that they're telling, there is something just universal about the feeling of being trapped that we can all feel when we watch something like this in this sort of setup. But when you add the race factor, there are definitely more layers that you can have to it, because not only does it mirror something that, you know, you could see on the news just about every day, there's also the angle of, there's this whole plot thread where she keeps basically avoiding going to see his uncle, I think, that they keep driving by. And it's basically her way of trying to distance herself from her past and all that. Like, she's running away from her past. And the way that I could be totally off base here, I know this is another thing where it's like, I mean, not only is it also uncomfortable for me to just sort of, you know, I try to avoid politics as much as I can, but also, in cases like this, there's going to be a certain point where I feel completely out of my element discussing this, so, due to the lack of certain experiences I've had in my life, that people this is more geared towards have had, or is affected more by. But the thing here, my wild stab in the dark here, in regards to this angle of her avoiding her past family, not only is it just because she's basically trying to be on a whole other path entirely, like her family to her is like a whole different set of people, and she would rather be on sort of this side of society, I guess, where they're more sort of like, I guess, on like the, you know, dirt road path, and she wants to be more on like the city side of things. But in a more, well, you get it. Especially if you saw the episode, you get it. But the thing was that I kind of also took that as was the way it mirrors her basically being pursued by this cop. And there's the whole thing where she's got her past with her family, but there's also just the past of black people in general and how they were treated in, say, like, you know, the 50s or 60s when we see stuff like this. And not only is it eerie that this is easily a present day setting, but there's also the sense of this is the past coming into reality. So in a sense, when she's running from the cops, she's also running from the past of black people in general, the way she's running from her own personal past. I don't know if I worded that exactly the way it's in my head, but I'm hoping that registers in some way. So, but the thing about it, though, is that it does eventually get blatant. Like, just when, like, the point has really already been hammered home, there's literally just the presence in the background of a scene of a Black Lives Matter poster. But then there's also stuff like, where, at the very end, surely I've made it clear that this is going to be, like, you know, spoilery, but I assume if you're watching this, you've seen at least some of these episodes by now. Where we get the psychiatrist scene in Psycho sort of explanation at the end of all this. Where it's like, yes, we got the point, you know, 20 minutes ago. We got the point again 10 minutes ago. Now that that's all been established, please give us one big speech that tells us everything we already know about what this episode is trying to say in great detail. And then that's where it just really kind of beats it over your head to the point that it's sort of starts to really not completely lose the power that it's got, but it really does take away from it in some way, because the thing that really made like the original show effective, like I said, at least from my memory of it, it never really, in the best episodes anyway, it never felt distracting in a way. Like, it was, in some cases it was clear, maybe more clear there than others, but it is another case of like, it just, it because the thing about that also was, it starts to become like all you think about. The allegory is like the only thing that's registering when you watch this, and it doesn't sort of stand alone as that, like what I was talking about, like that feeling of being trapped. Also that it was really thriving on while also telling the story that it needed to tell. But the thing is that it's sort of something that back then it felt like it sort of creeped in the message that it was trying to tell. And it's like you'd just be watching, you know, a regular episode and you know something surreal would happen. But that's the thing also, is like the realism of what it's clearly talking about on top of the surrealism of it, and the way they just sort of slowly blend together. Where, like, I feel like a lot of the episodes back then were episodes that sort of already felt surreal. Like, they have to feel surreal instantly. Which is usually always brought about by the presence of Rod Serling, or in our cases, Jordan Peele. But there's no, like, sort of, you're watching the surreal thing, and then it slowly starts to creep in, like, oh shit, this is real life. While also being somehow stuck in that surreal category, which is what the title of the show refers to. So, but there's no sort of slow creeping in pretty much any of these. It's all about the not-so-subtle message about real life now that they're trying to put in there. Only there's no subtlety whatsoever. That's just what the episode is about. And the thing that's slowly it's the reverse. The thing that's slowly creeping in is like an effective story of sorts to tell this with. It's like just all about the point and not about the story itself. So you can. So as far as this episode goes, I do think the main problem, once again, is the fact that they don't seem to have a particular time that they want. And obviously, I'm usually against, you know, basically telling somebody you only have this limited amount of time to tell your story. But I mean, when you're doing an anthology thing like this in a series that's known for making incredible shit in a span of like 25 minutes. It feels like you're sort of giving them a safety net by giving them more time and making it. It's seemingly, I don't know if easier was the word I was going to say, but it's, yeah, it just feels like it's gives it too much time to sort of lose the impact of it, and we get to the point to where it beats us over the head with it because it has the time to. Which kind of sucks. Like, also, that's a problem that I had also with 6 Degrees of Freedom, where you talk about, like, once again, like the comedian, its main problem was that it was almost an hour, and the same thing is true for 6 Degrees of Freedom. And the thing is that when you have that much time, it feels less like it's about, you know, developing the character or developing the story. It's gives you too much time, which means that that's more time it gives you to basically get ahead of it. And that was the thing about the small time slot that the original show had, was you were so sucked into it that by the time you were sucked into it, you weren't thinking ahead, so it was able to grab you when you were just, you know, getting there. And the surprises worked most of the time because of that. And it's... So that's really missing here from these, because it's also one of those cases of 9 times out of 10 you can sort of tell where it's going. Like, I noticed when you watch like A Traveler, and it's like, first off, it feels like it's right there in the title. Like, when you see the title, I'm sure, like when it comes up on the screen or when you see it listed in the episode list, and when we were waiting for it to air, everybody was calling it A Traveler. Not realizing the A was an initial. So it's like if you watch enough of the, you know, other shows, it's like you already know, when in doubt, assume it's aliens. And most of the time you'll probably be right. And when you have this new series that's gonna, you know, reboot it and really try to do something fresh here, while also talking about the state of the world now, there's still going to be those old directions that it goes in, but it doesn't feel like it's sort of doing the classic thing. There are a lot of things in A Traveler that do sort of feel like a classic episode, whether it be the opening or, you know, really the reveal of his antenna, even stuff like that, do feel like, you know, classic episodes. I do love the way it opens with the Northern Lights and all that, and there's something really atmospheric about it. But holy shit does it go off the rails, like, really fast. Because there's the whole middle portion where it's great. It does have a really great lead character, the one that's investigating Steven Yeun's character, who basically, while he's charming everybody, is like just constantly saying, like, this guy is wrong, we've got to figure out why and what's going on exactly. But the way the characters interact in that episode also doesn't really do it any favors. Particularly the Grey Kinnear. I remember finding it bizarre that the Grey Kinnear character, like, barely talked to him directly at first. Because it was like, you know, he walks in, he sees Steven Yeun in there, and he turns to her, and he's like, you know, who the fuck is that? And why is he in a suit? And, like, all his questions are directed at her instead of him. And at first I thought it was going to be like this whole thing where it's like, is there a reason he doesn't talk to him directly even though he can see him? What direction's that going? But no, it was just weirdly him directing his questions at the person he probably shouldn't have been directing them at. And then he just started talking to him. And then it went into the whole Russian side plot with him where it just really went off the rails. And you could just tell that whole middle portion where he's like charming them, where that's kind of the point. You could just really get this sense of, it just felt really dragged out and just really redundant. To a payoff that, a lot of the things too, payoffs that just really aren't that great. It's like you talk about Stephen King is like the master of great story and shitty ending. It feels like this wasn't rebooted by Peele. It feels like it was rebooted by Stephen King, and he wrote all the endings. Is basically what it feels like. And so you've also got, even the alien thing even carried over in the Wonderkin, where we get the whole segment where, I know apparently a lot of people thought the Wonderkin was kind of dumb, but I think it might be my favorite one so far, actually. Because number one, a lot of it feels like the Twilight Zone, which you can't say about a lot of this. That's the problem I had with Replay too, where not only did it have, you know, that awesome setup, and it was a really great way to get to the point it was trying to make, but by the end when we get her just, you know, speechifying, it just doesn't even feel like the Twilight Zone anymore. Even though we did, once again, get big explanatory scenes like that before, still, after a while, it just really doesn't feel like the show it's supposed to be. And it's like, and that's not even to say that, I mean, because there is a certain extent where you want this show to do its own thing, and not just seem like it's going to try to carbon copy the other series, but still, there is a certain thing here that made the Twilight Zone what it was, and that's going to be what we expect to an extent, but at the same time, you need to find a way to do that own thing, but also keep that feel, because that feel is what we're here for. Otherwise, you can call this show any other title, but I don't know, but, and yeah, like the Wonderkind, it also did the, sort of clear satire thing. It's really going, like, I talk about the politics that are, in some of these, and it's like, the Wonderkind is just straight up politics. It's about politics. It's about Jacob Tremblay running for president, and John Cho being his, you know, campaign manager, and a very, unfortunately wasted John Larroquette for some reason. And the thing here is that what the Wonderkind, the main problem I had with the Wonderkind actually was those cuts back to John Cho being in this mystery place that's clearly not going to be revealed where it is until the end of the episode. When it's clear he's been injured in some way, and he's in what appears to be a sort of hospital, but we're like so close on him and they're hiding so much from us, you know there's going to be some reveal of where exactly he is. Once again, and the fact that, you know, Tremblay was so sort of weirdly, like, not childlike. There was something really bizarre about him where he was like really... There was a massive back and forth because when he started off, when he was campaigning, he was like, you know, the child that's way too smart. He's basically like an amplified version of his character in Wonder without the facial problems. But then when he was in the White House, he's like the petulant child. And it's like there was no in-between. There was one extreme and then there was another extreme, and they're on two totally different sides of the spectrum. And because he was so weird, and because we didn't see the odd place that John Cho was being treated, of course, I said what I said before. It's the Twilight Zone. When in doubt, assume it's aliens. So I pretty much assumed that Jacob Tremblay was going to be revealed to be like this otherworldly creature that just wanted to get control over everything, and then he took John Cho up to God knows where and was operating on him or something. But no, honestly, that actually probably would have been a little less dumb than what it actually is, admittedly, but still. I did just think there was something to the Wonderkin that was so weirdly off. Like I said, it was weirdly off in one sense already, with the way Charlie's character was one thing, and then another. It was I think some people had trouble with that, and thought it was a character inconsistency, but I think it makes perfect sense, especially when you look at what it's clear they're probably getting at. Once again, not to get too political, but it's like, you know, you've got the person here that's like, I'm campaigning, and, you know, I'm the really off-the-radar choice, and everybody's like, you know, I like him because he's not a politician, and I like him because he says what I'm thinking and what I feel. He doesn't feel like, you know, some other person that's just, you know, talking up stuff they don't plan on doing. And then once he gets in the White House, obviously, he's very childlike. He's like, you know, do this thing, and they're like, we can't just do that. And he's like, no, do that thing. And so on, and he gets more, the more childlike he gets, the more out of control he gets, and all that. It's like Tom Hanks in Big after he started working at the toy factory, if he was totally out of control and a complete and total asshole. So, almost to a dangerous degree. Like, you know, it's cute at the start when you put penguins on the front lawn of the White House, but by the time you get to the point that he does, we're in serious trouble. And like I said, they do something really, like, they just give it a really off feel that's really kind of nice. Like I said, feels very Twilight Zone-like. That shot overhead of the Oval Office with just all the toys scattered everywhere and him barking orders was just so weirdly bizarre and surreal. I don't know, there was just something I really liked about it. And just the feel of it in general. But yeah, and then, you know, after a while it goes into... That's the thing, though, is... You know, once you see what the point is and what they're probably getting at, like I said, the episode is... They've gone into the point, like, maybe 5 minutes in, and 5 minutes in you're like, okay, I get it. But then they've got the rest of the episode to do to just keep going on that allegory. And, you know, you're stuck. You're stuck with it. So, I don't know. But I do think the performances really do carry these. Sana Lathan's obviously amazing in Replay. And I talked about, you know, the lead actress in A Traveler. I do think Steven Yeun was maybe miscast. Though I did also hear that I may not think that if I had seen Burning by this point, which I haven't yet. But even so, I do think there would have been an appeal to have somebody that was, like, more effortlessly suave, and somebody that was, like, somebody that felt, you know, more subtly threatening. But as it is, it's just... It's, for the most part, they're fine, though. And then you got John Cho, who's obviously really showing just how great of an actor he can be. And Jacob Tremblay, who we obviously know. And the cast of 6 Degrees of Freedom, also. Even if I really didn't necessarily feel much for those characters. Especially with the sort of lazy way they went about character development, where it's like... Character development in 6 Days of Freedom. And there's a lot of characters in there we've got to establish and get to know and love and fear for and care about in what's almost an hour, which, like I said, at the same time I'm saying it's way too much time for that story, but then there's all those characters. So it really comes down to there's way too many fucking characters, and a lot of them, I don't remember any of their damn names at this point. But the thing is that because we've got all these characters and because we've got this time frame, there are 2 things that we do in regards to character development. We either dump a shitload of boring exposition or they sing together. The age-old thing where people are bond. We just talked about this when I talked about Long Shot. And it's like, people are like, oh, have those characters sing together. The music will speak for the scene and, lift the audience and all that. And voila, we care about the characters because they sang together. I don't go into that. So, then there's the whole thing where it was sort of... I guess it sort of had this, space thriller vibe, sort of like, I get Gravity seems like an easy comparison, but as far as, that whole stranded feeling, Moon would seem like an easy comparison also. But sort of like, it feels more like Alien without the alien in it, but with the similar attempt at tension. I would never compare this kind of tension to Alien's tension by any means. And we've got, some easy ways of going with that. So they play on the idea that if you've seen any sort of media whatsoever, mirrors are probably going to make you nervous, especially if you're in some thriller, potentially horror sort of scenario. So we've got the scene of the dude, and we've got his point of view as he keeps looking up at the mirror, like it's trying to fuck with us in our anticipation. But overall, it just doesn't feel like it leads to much. And after a while, it's one of those cases where, you sort of figure it out, but then they try to throw you a curveball, but it's like, because it's the whole thing of, hey guys, we're being watched. Like the whole episode where all the people are being watched in the neighborhood as they lose their minds in the original series, and it's like hey guys, we're being watched, and this is an experiment and all that. And basically the payoff is... oh, are they being watched? And it's like, oh, no, they're not being watched. And it's like, oh, yeah, they're being watched, just not being watched by the people we thought they were being watched by. Big surprise, either way. And yeah, it's just really sort of underwhelming, especially with all that build-up. And it feels like it comes, like, so abruptly. Like, after almost an hour. This did not need to... How the hell did 6 Degrees of Freedom get to almost an hour? I cannot process that. So, yeah, and obviously a second season has been confirmed. So maybe they'll keep going. Another series... Obviously, in the first video, I talked about all the different series that... you could say spawned after the Twilight Zone, whether it be The Outer Limits or Rod Serling's other show or stuff like Black Mirror. An anthology series that's not near as serious that I've been rewatching is Tales from the Crypt. And the thing that I realized while watching Tales from the Crypt again was that when you have anthology series like this where it's not one continuous story, there can be cases where you have, like... The reason you can keep coming back to them no matter if you're not really into them is that there is like season 1 of Tales from the Crypt is amazing from beginning to end, but then as the series goes on all the way down to 7 especially, you've got to really root through a lot of crap. But it's like you go through the crap and you go through the crap and you go through the crap, and eventually there's going to be one episode that's fucking amazing. And then you got to keep searching for those. And it's like, as I keep watching these, I feel like that one... I know it's probably come for some people already. Like I said, I know Replay hit really well. I think A-Traveler did pretty well for a lot of people also. But I'm still waiting for that episode that could come in the next 4 episodes, or could come in Season 2, where it's like, okay, this is why I watch stuff like this. But in the meantime, I'll still be waiting. But the main thing also that I found, especially a problem I kind of had in 6 Degrees of Freedom, is that there was a certain level... I mean, it might also be, you know, the era in which it was released, the original show, but it's like, there was that certain camp factor to it. Where it's like, the original Twilight Zone series doesn't just have social commentary, doesn't just have, you know, weird surreal shit happening. It's so much fun to watch. That's why they always play it in marathons, like all the time. It's because there's just such a fun factor to watching it. This new series, like, is not having any fun whatsoever. It is so fucking serious about itself. And like I said, in some cases with the subject matter I can understand and the points they're trying to make, but the old series has shown that you can mesh these things, and you shouldn't be afraid to try that. I mean, as difficult as it may be, that's what makes it so good, is you have to fucking try in order to make it work. And God, that's another thing that's so off-putting to me, is it's so goddamn serious. Just all the time. And just has no sort of, you know... there's clearly that's clearly something that's missing here. So that's pretty much how I felt about these 4 episodes bouncing around in a nutshell. So like I said, I talked about the politics stuff a lot, and I can't stress enough that I do think it's important that it's in there, especially since it's always been there. But you gotta really be able to mesh it with stuff, and you might end up making the point even more powerful if you can tell it in a certain way, as opposed to just basically having Peele come on screen. And instead of doing his whole thing where he says, this is the story, this is the character, this is the Twilight Zone, it's like he just turns a camera to the news and just says, hey, did you know this is the real world now? Let's take a look. With no real creativity thrown in that much. No sort of sly humor, no sort of, you know, tongue-in-cheek factor, anything like that. We're just gonna stare at the news stone-faced. And that's pretty much what we're looking at. At least that's how I took this. There may be people that, like, vehemently disagree, and that's okay. But, yeah, and I really, really wanted to be into this, because, like I said, I am really growing into, like, a huge Peele fan. And this seemed like something that was just totally in his wheelhouse. But I think that's another thing, too, is it's like, I'd really like him to try his hand at an episode. And I don't know if we're going to see that or not. But I guess that remains to be seen. So, I know the other episodes, I believe, have been established, like who's in them and, you know, who wrote and or made them and all that and what their plots are. But I haven't looked into that. I kind of try to avoid everything before, like when it ends and it says on the next Twilight Zone, I just fuck off, because I don't want to know. I want to go like completely and totally freshly into the next episode. So we'll see what happens, but I'm really hoping something amazing happens in these last 4 episodes for this season, and then maybe that'll get me somewhat pumped for this second season that's already been confirmed. So we'll see what happens. I may keep up with this TV thing next month also, because I'm pretty sure it's next month, the second season of Big Little Lies, because I love the first season, so I may do that episode to episode as well. So we'll see, unless I'm tired of it by that point, but we'll see. So yes, so I don't know if I cover an episode by itself in these next 4 episodes of this season. It'll probably mean that the episode is fucking amazing, and I just won't be able to wait to talk about it in great detail, or it'll be like this. And if the episodes are kind of underwhelming, then we'll just kind of do a group thing about them. So that's what these 4 were. Let's pray for the last 4 and see what happens. So until that, that's it.